have 5 minutes to start the talk, but I thought why not to use this time to talk with Mike Talks. Mike, are you there?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you well. Oh, super. Good to see you, Mike.
If you know, I've contributed to a book on testers. I think it's IT people work around the world from home, and my contribution to that book was the start of a video conference is indistinguishable from a séance, which pretty much every start of things involves people screaming out into the void. Hi, can you hear me? I think I said that about 3 times before I realised how I was muted. Good evening from New Zealand. Good afternoon to everyone in India and around the world.
Cool. Well, I usually talk a lot about professional and publicly available information about the speakers, but I thought why not to tell people some interesting things about you that they won't know otherwise because you're my friend. Yes. So people, that's Mike Talks for you. He's a tester, author, and IT anthropologist. If I remember the name of his book correctly, I think you wrote a tester who learned with the black sheep something, right? Something.
Yes. I think probably the biggest thing I've contributed to that I've been involved with is a book called How to Test. And so my glasses are steaming up. It's a bit steamy. It's a bit like
I just
down
on
here.
My side, I hear you a bit low. Do you mind
checking my audio?
Audio, yeah.
You might just need to up me. It's this microphone that sometimes, whenever I've recorded sessions, I almost always have to up the microphone, up the audio a little bit.
Okay, or maybe you can just be as crazy as loud today and that this conference.
That's true. My wife does complain a lot about me being a little bit
I was
loud
going
side.
to just give you an introduction that this guy loves his wife a lot, so much so that I already know what she likes from your Facebook content that you specially share for her. Oh, that's Mike for you people. He has a very unique way of showing.
Yeah, I think most, me and my wife seem to use Facebook as a channel to communicate with each other, even when we're in the same house.
So maybe that's warrant for another talk, Mike. What do you think? How to communicate with each other using social media, considering the Corona time? So I think it still makes a lot of sense.
We're lucky to have a reasonably sized house, and during what's been probably 3 months quarantine for us in New Zealand, I've moved downstairs where my office is this evening, and my wife tends to live upstairs, and we tend to meet in the middle at set times, so we're not living on top of each other. I've had co-workers where we were on audio conference, and it's obvious that the space that they're using is also their children's music space. So they'll start speaking, and you'll start to hear a piano solo behind them. So we were relatively lucky in lockdown.
All right. Well, the talk today you are going to deliver to us is the hard-learned lessons in test automation, and I think I already know one from the title of your talk itself. It's a joke. And I think it's a time now for you to take the show. You can share your screen. We can quickly check the setup.
Oh yeah, how do I do that? So picking the right screen. So again, you can see everything on my screen.
Perfect. We see your screen. I hear you.
Hi there, my name's Mike Talks. I'm a tester based in New Zealand, tester, author, and IT anthropologist, which means that throughout my career I've been studying the way that not just testing but different branches of IT interact and kind of build their own tribes, which is perfect for a tribe conference. And I'm really happy to be here today representing New Zealand and being a part of a community that I've been recently less a part of, but a really passionate part of. So, as I said, I'm a tester based in Wellington. Automation since 1999, so that's 21 years, to varying degrees. And that can be a bit of of a curse. Most of the tools that were around in 1999 are not around anymore, and in a way we'll touch a little bit upon that. To keep relevant in test automation has been constantly reinventing yourself, almost like David Bowie, relearning, because there's always new tools on the horizon, new approaches. So about 2 years ago, I was presented with a bit of a challenge from my boss. I'd just come off one project, and there was a certain way that our business unit in Datacom were approaching test automation, and it felt that it seemed to be out of sync with some other places and how they were talking about test automation. As it turned out, it wasn't. But I was given a mission to go out, find other people, talk to your peers, and find out what's going on in the test automation space for them. Now, I think when I first joined the IT test community 10 years ago, you'd hear this kind of rumbling. People would get very excited about something, and that kind of rumbling would become amplified, and you'd hear more and more people talking about an X or a Y. But actually trying to go and sit with people and actually, look, talk me through your process. So essentially that was a carte blanche for me to take a lot of people out for coffee around Wellington and just sit down with them and really using BA practice, interview them on how are they handling test automation. By the way, this is an open invite. Whenever testers visit Wellington, I often get these odd random requests of, I'm passing through Wellington, love to meet you. If anyone does happen to be in Wellington, it won't be for a while because obviously with COVID, there's no international travel at the minute. But send me an invite on LinkedIn or Twitter and I'll take you out for a coffee. Seeing as I think there's 500 people watching this, I think that could be a very, very expensive thing to offer. I might have to do a limit. But yeah, if you're in Wellington, let's have a chat. So having this chat with people about test automation. One of the great things about listening, I think in the end, I interviewed 18 people about this. And from 18 different conversations, you start to hear things again and again. And the things that you start to hear kind of amplify in your mind. And at the end of all these interviews, what it is I transpose the interviews into little Post-it notes, sound bites, and I kind of collected them on my garage wall, and some of them are still there, to gather the general areas that people were talking about test automation. And that's actually the basis of this whole talk. So first of all, the thing that I heard the most were that 90% of the people I were talking to, they were on a project that were on their second attempt to do test automation, and this time they were trying to get it right. Okay, so in all these conversations, there was a reoccurring pain point, a thing that was causing basically their initial automation approach to get into a lot of mess. And what I'd like to try right now is just give you about a minute, and if those of you who've come back from lunch, I hope you had a really good lunch, by the way, just type what you think the reoccurring pain point might have been. And I'll just try and see if I can see that. I actually don't think I can see that, can I? Comments?
I can read that for you.
Would you read them?
Yes. So if you like, you can just go to the chat section. But now,
here we go. Good morning. Okay. Timeouts was one. Handling input data, maintainability, manual interventions, flakiness, maintenance, duplicate codes. These are all really great examples. Yeah. A lot of these things can be handled. Things like execution speed. There's approaches for that, feature updates, there's things for that. I think there was flakiness, we'll talk about it in a bit. Can you automate all the tests? I think we'll talk about that a little bit as well. But the thing that's coming up the most, I'm very glad to see, is indeed maintenance. And this became a bigger problem the more the project moved from a waterfall approach to an agile approach. And that's really simply that you would build a suite with all these fantastic test automation tests. But every time a developer came around to change the software, the automation kept breaking. And a lot of these people's stories were about using particularly record and play type tools. The type of tool that it's really easy to build up a suite of tests very, very, very quickly. Yeah. And it is, you do about a 2 week evaluation on a tool like that, and at the end of 2 weeks, I've managed to automate 50 tests. But then about 6 months down the line, developers have moved fields or merged certain ways that things have happened, and you find that it's very difficult. A lot of these tests have broken a lot, and almost the amount of maintenance changes that they need is proportional to the amount of that the software have changed. And in some ways, it's actually more pain. It's actually more work to update the automation than it is the code, and that's something that's very, very wrong. So, like I said, 90% of the people I spoke to had used this tool, the tool that maybe 10 years ago we were raving about. It's record and play. It's really simple. It's, anyone can create test automation. And then having a really difficult conversation saying, with their stakeholders saying, we really want to start again. And it is a really difficult conversation. A lot of people get hung up on the cost of the tool. And certainly there are some fantastic free tools. But the real cost of your tool isn't the cost to purchase it. It's the cost that you invest in. And that's the hours you put in to create your test automation and indeed to maintain it. And that's where it's difficult to say, you know what, this approach isn't working. We need to try again. You get maybe 1 or 2 chances at this. Ideally, if you need to redo your automation from scratch, you need to be really, really careful. And most of the teams I spoke to, they'd rushed into the first iteration of testing. They'd just gone with something everyone was raving about, something that handled really well on a week or 2 week evaluation. But when it came to saying, look, we're going to start again, they really took more of what you'd consider to be an IT approach, which is, hey, let's work out what we need from scratch rather than just rushing into the second thing and maybe getting ourselves in the mess all over again. So again, a thing we heard a lot was don't start with a tool. When particularly you plug into, go into LinkedIn or go into Twitter, a lot of people will be raving about a particular tool. Oh, this is fantastic. This is the tool. I think about 15 years ago, everything was going to be, we're going to run, using Cucumber is going to be that's the way to go for automation. And 20 years ago, there was record and play was everything. And what we tend to do is we tend to get really sucked in with the tool. Like, here is a tool that works, that's great. And that's how we often get into mess. But looking at it a second time, most teams, instead of saying, we want this tool is good, everyone's talking about this tool. So, okay, what are we trying to actually achieve? What is the goal of our test automation? And again, for most people, it came for this, that for any testing, what we're trying to achieve, first of all, is something speedy. And secondly, is to have feedback on the build or the state of some software. So, ideally, the faster and more helpful the feedback, the better. I think most of you will know the thing about catching a bug early means it costs the project much less to find a problem really early than to let it go through multiple stages and go through several things and then finding a problem. amongst other things, what I found, and this is again as a developer, in my development days before 1999, that gives you an idea of just how old I am. If I changed some code, committed it, built it, tested it straight away, if I found any problems with it, what I could remember is, oh, I remember everything I've changed most of what I've changed the last couple of days. And so it was easy to get to retrace your roots. If you commit code today and someone tests it in 2 months, you're not going to have a clue. So that's just another dimension about having really fast feedback helps. Build feedback regression was something that was often talked about. Each team was actually talking about had different constraints because they had different projects, not surprisingly. And what they were trying to do was always make things faster, but in different ways. There was one project that had a 3-week manual evaluation for each build, and they just kind of wanted to turn that down into maybe 4 days. Yeah. But most teams were talking about, hey, when a developer's committed a piece of code, can we get some build feedback regression? The time frame I tended to hear a lot of, wouldn't it be great if we got that back in about 20 minutes to half an hour? Yeah. And the joke about that, and the reason for that icon is, at the time, on the ground floor, we had a cafe that created pizzas. So it was felt that was long enough for a developer to hit commit, go down, order the pizza, come back up and go, all right, I've got a build report. So getting the best out of test automation. Every team, they pretty much hammered out these 3 constraints and really understood that they had to kind of accept them to get the best out of what we're doing. So first of all, the understanding that automation takes time. One of the traps with the record and play approach to test automation is you can think, well, we can get test automation scripts for free, as all testers do automation, and everyone's going, can we go on a race? Can we go on a race to get to test automation? Often you'll have test automation done separately to the rest of the project, and we're going to bring somebody in, they're going to automate everything, and then they're going to walk out the door, and then we'll just keep running the things that they've built. That kind of approach where automation is this add-on to your project, it comes in and it goes out, and then you're left with something, and that'll just be what it is forever. So understanding, it's a long-term commitment. It's like having a puppy for Christmas. Secondly, to get the best out of automation, you really needed to focus on what was important. I worked on one project where they tried to automate everything, and by everything, they really meant everything. So if a defect was found, the test for it would be automated, and it would become part of the test suite that would be run till the end of time. Yeah, and whilst that's reasonable, if something is a major showstopper, it happened and it was really embarrassing, and maybe we should check that never happens again. It's a little bit much to say every defect we ever had, we should check that it never comes back. And that it can create a test suite that has a lot of tests, but you're not sure about what the value is. So it's really important to have people involved and say, would a test that checked for this, would that be important to you? And that's a conversation I often have as a manual or test automator with business owners, particularly to find out what's really important about the product and what's not. Thirdly, it was important that no special training was required. There are a couple of tools that we looked into when we spoke with people, and they would fly a training team for your project all the way from Germany to come in and deliver bespoke training on this particular product. And it was a wonderful product, but it used a particular kind of language, a bespoke kind of language, and it meant that you had to bring someone from Germany to run your training, and if any of your team changed, you'd have to do that all over again. So it was really important that whatever tool you use, it could use a mainstream language, something ideally like Java or Ruby, that you can just say, hey, there's some resources over here, go learn Java, go learn Ruby, or even better to say, we're an IT company, we have people who do Java and Ruby. Another key part that came out from all this was talk about the automation spectrum. So, like I said, often, maybe 10 years ago, you'd hear somebody raving about a certain tool. Oh, there's this fantastic tool. And the amount of times I'd have conversation with business owners who would say, oh, look, I was talking about a friend of mine who's a business owner on the project, and he told me about this tool. Yeah. And they're doing great things with this tool. So we tend to be very tool focused of, oh, there's this fantastic tool. And as I talked about, looking at a tool does not make you look at a goal. You just, here's the thing, it might be useful, it might not be. So most teams I talked to got away with the idea of, automation testing is a tool, a singular tool. Instead, they adopted the idea that automation is a toolbox. That is, that there are different types of automation that can help. So, for instance, there is Selenium that helps with UI testing a completed product. But under the surface, you can use SOAP to test, or just code that has an API interface to test at an API interface if your product is made of different components talking to each other via API. Or you can even go even lower, and you can run unit tests on the actual code to try out different scenarios that would be really difficult to set up if you were just doing it through the UI. So that leads to something like the automation pyramid, which I'm sure, it's not a new idea. It's been there for 10 years, but fundamentally it's saying, we should be testing things at the UI level that are relevant to the UI level. And we should probably test in depth right down here at the unit level. So just to give you an indicator of this, just the truth tends to be that instead of anything that resembles a pyramid, we probably have the reverse, where we tend to get really obsessed at UI tests. They're often the most easy to understand because it's using the product like a manual tester would use a product, and we create this kind of reverse pyramid. Some people might call it an ice cream cone, where we have more UI tests than we have at the bottom. But fundamentally, with the pyramid, what we're trying to grasp is this: for a UI test, and I've performed this with my team as a piece of testing. For instance, you have there's a dice roller. We've used a website for this. You can test rolling a dice, and it takes about a second for you to hit the button, it send out the request, and it pull back the request and display something. Yeah, so it's relatively heavy, there's a lot of components involved on that. And that's great if you just you might want to just keep hitting roll again, and check that you eventually over time get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. However, if you want to test how the dice roller works in depth, you for instance, you want to make sure that roughly a sixth of the time each dice is rolled. This is a similar test, but run at the unit level. And for this test, which is really close to the code, so there's no overhead for rendering a page, for rendering all these components, and indeed sending requests all the way around the world and back again. Within 2 seconds, we can simulate about 600,000 rolls. So that's probably about So one roll is about 2 seconds. 600,000 rolls is two seconds. If there's lots of variations of scenario on dice rolling or something that happens just within a single unit, you want to really test it really close to the unit level, because it's a way of getting the speed that you really need. So from this, a really key understanding was, are we testing in an appropriate layer? And often I'm still talking just a couple of years after all these interviews to people, and that is still a real challenge, moving your test to an appropriate layer. It's difficult because you don't really know what's inside the unit and what's inside the API. It's sometimes easier to evaluate at the UI level, but you're not really getting that power. So something that's always to be mindful: don't test the database with a GUI tool. That was a quote from someone at TradeMe, which is a company near us in Wellington. It's kind of like an eBay, and it's a really good point. If there's data in the database and there's different variations of data, you should really be using something like a unit test, ideally something that's much closer to the database than the UI level. So, along with this key idea that it was important to handle your test automation like code. A key thing I helped out with the More Agile Testing book by Janet Gregory and Lisa Crispin, and there was a very controversial comment there about your test automation is more important than your production automation. Controversial, and I didn't really agree with it at the time, and we had a bit of a discussion on a thread about this. But the point was made: well, the test automation shows you how the product should work. Yeah. If your production automation is wrong, the test automation guides you to how your production code should behave. So it's really important. If it's robust and it works well, it helps it helps to document the product that you're producing, and again, obviously, it helps to make sure that what goes out the door really matches your expectations. So it was important to handle automation like code, a little bit like we said. Typically, for automation projects, someone would come in, do some work, and then fly out, and their involvement with your project would be fleeting. They'd set something up and away they'd go. That often didn't work because the code would change and someone needed to be around to change the automation, like the code, like the actual product or code had changed. So there was these ideas that came across, and these I heard a lot, but from my business unit, they were very, very strong things that we got from our developers. So first of all, your automation needs to be broken into methods as much as possible. Because methods are just a way of simplifying complexity. Ideally, if you have an element on the screen, only one method should touch it. So for instance, if you change your login process and you change the name of the fields on your login process, you find the method that relates to the login process if you're doing UI testing, and you change that, and then all your tests use that method, and you're not going through 120 tests changing one line of code for every one of those tests. Likewise, if you're doing API testing, the API definition should be in a method, and if the API method changes, you just change one method or one class, and then all of a sudden all your tests should fall into line with that modification. Whenever possible, you should use design patterns for locating elements and working with elements. Some of the ideas that people were talking about were about locating, how difficult it was to locate elements, how to deal with slow page loading, how to know when a page is loading. Design patterns will help you with all this. Page object model, page object design, again, is another design pattern that helps you break down pages into classes, that again allows you to have a consistent approach to the pages of your product. And page flow was important as well. One of the key things was looking and treating your automation as a code base. And this key thing, and I'll challenge you on this, that whenever you go in to modify your test automation, are you leaving it in a better state than you found it, or are you just applying a band-aid? That's my big challenge to you. Every time you do a code change, are you leaving the system better than you found it, or are you just fixing one problem? And that's where good code craftsmanship comes from. An important part of things was choosing focus. We've talked a little bit about this. This is a lot of people's experience of doing test automation. Is here's a test automator. You know, everyone else has gone. They're here for a while. They're building some test automation. They're a kind of a lone thing. They work separately to the rest of the team. And I can't tell you how wrong that is. It's important that everyone should be involved with test automation. Great stories I heard. One of my favorite stories involved, and this again relates to the fact that like we said, test automation takes time and it needs focus. And what would happen is it was a simple tool, a spreadsheet, and testers and indeed anyone else would write in there their ideas for a test, for an automated test. And what would happen is the whole team would meet and discuss them, and they'd basically upvote or downvote different ideas. And what that meant is that the tests that got built for the suite always were the things that people felt were the most relevant. They didn't include 1,001 different ways to log in, but omitted something else. And it's important, with test automation, you can't test anything. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to simulate the important parts of the test system, trying to test the important high-value parts of your system that you want to just check and you don't want to manually go through every single time a developer does a build. So with the spreadsheet model, for instance, the whole team could talk about areas of risk. The amount of times I have conversations with people who don't really understand testing, who think that we're just obsessed with spelling mistakes on and will fail a delivery because of spelling mistakes. But when you actually have a conversation about, here are the areas of risk that we really want to pick up, they'll go, oh, actually, everything that you're doing is really important. So should be your automation. It's important as much as possible to try and test your system end to end. And like I say, one of the reasons you're doing it through automation is because it's painful doing it manually. But as we'll talk again in just a couple of minutes, that does not mean that testers are not involved both in automation and with the products. So some problem areas that would happen. Again, people were picking this up. There's always that test that's always failing. What is an acceptable level of tests passed for each automation suite? Each time you run an automation suite, there can only ever be one answer to that: 100%. And some of you might be challenged about that, and some of you might, but yeah. But if you're running a suite every morning and you're going, 98% is good enough. Or even, it's that test. It always does that. What you're saying is it's something, either your test, it always fails, but it's not important, so why are you testing it every day? Or your test is kind of a bit flaky and you're not really paying attention to your test automation. So that failing test kind of distracts everyone. So, and it's really difficult. The thing that most teams have talked about, it's important that you either fix it, and this is the difficult one, or you get rid of it. Because if that test's always broken or always failing, and it doesn't really matter, and you're not even stopping, it's that one, it always does that, yeah. You're getting no value from that test. It might as well be there. But we're terrible. We hate to destroy things. We hate to delete things. But that test is causing a distraction. If you look up at your board, because we run ours every morning, and first thing that you'd do is look up at the board, and if it was red, we'd say, oh, what went wrong? So if it's green, you go, okay, cool, I can get on with my life. But if you look up and it's red, someone needs to investigate that. And usually if you're the first one in the office, that's you. So talking about this, where does this leave testers? Well, with continuous automation covering continuous regression, testing used to feel like this. And particularly as a test manager, here's, does this ring a bell? So some of the older ones of you, where you come in and your test manager would say, well, we've got 70 tests to get through this week. You need to just each do 10 a day. Yeah. And I think I'd feel a bit like this guy over there, just kind of like, oh, I need to get, you each end up with a quota. It's a production line of testing. We need to get through X many things today. But now we're using automation to do those kind of robotic tasks. And it means that testing is a lot more about analysis, looking at things. Particularly what people have found is test automation covers the regression things, the things that the system's always used to do. And that means that it allows us to focus in detail of, here's a new feature. What are all the different ways that this new feature can be tested to just manually do evaluation on that piece of code? And that's not something that you can pre-do in automation, because the code's not even built. Often in agile teams, there's not even hard rules for how that piece of automation would work. And we'll try a few things, and we'll try a few different ways that it'll look. And so the best way to do is kind of create mind maps of, here are all the different things we can do, test for this new feature. You might get a new feature delivered and go, okay, there's certain ways that they've really well designed the UI. That means all these things I don't need to worry about. But often we test a new feature in a lot of depth, and then we'll just pick out maybe 2 or 3 of those scenarios to actually do automation that we'll do going forwards. It's also important that as testers, we have an important voice about guiding what makes useful automation. And in an ideal world, if someone has built a very good framework, there's often a partnership between testers and developers. And the developers will actually build the framework, the reporting mechanism, the mechanism that builds the actual, that runs and manages the actual tests. And we could get involved in defining the actual tests. And so often, who's best to do test automation, developers or testers? Often it's both. Often it's a mix of these skills. If you've got a really good framework, the testers can learn a programming language and just focus on these components. And ideally, the whole framework supports this kind of test definition, and they can look after it and run it as well. So, in summary, with about 3 minutes before questions, the thing I learned from all these conversations is, number one, you want to start with a goal. Secondly, you need to accept some constraints about test automations, and they are namely that it does take time. It requires you to focus on what's important, and then ideally, no special training is required. It's important to remember that automation is a toolbox. If you find yourself overcommitting to a single tool, odds are that you're going to get a bit stuck. Try and remember the test automation pyramid. Ask, what are we doing at the unit level? That is like gold. What are we doing at the unit level? Should we be doing more? Should some of our UI tests actually be unit tests? Very difficult question, but really worthwhile. Don't forget to involve everyone. It's not just a tester thing. It's not just a developer thing. It's not just even this automation contractor that's just coming in for a couple of weeks. It's important that it's a whole team approach to testing. Build it to maintain it. Really important. We said maintenance was the main reason that automation ended up getting thrown away. And finally, don't accept that failing tests. If it's not 100%, if it's not green, something's wrong. fix it, throw it away. And with that, we have 6 minutes for questions.
Thank you,
By the way,
Mike.
that's my Twitter handle. There's a load of useful resources of one kind or another from my testing on testsheepnz.github.io. Little things you can play with and stuff. Right, are we ready?
Yes, I would start with an interesting question where I think your experience can help us a lot. So, do you have an advice on how to go about fixing a bloated automation suite, changing culture behaviors to support the new approach? I guess that warrants for another talk, but maybe
this talk was cut down from a slightly larger talk that I've previously done, and there is a slide that I put right at the end just in case. Can you still see my screen? Yeah, and that's exactly what I tried to sum up with this is the fact that your test automation suite might be a bit like a motorcycle, but you might have so many tests on that suite that it's like putting an elephant on a motorcycle. Now, the approach for that, some people have approached it. Well, there's two ways. First of all, they might look at the whole suite and say, well, actually, do we need all those tests? That's one of the really important things about, I talked about focus, and particularly about the team that was upvoting tests. If you make sure that the tests that you're running are really relevant, often a bloated test suite, for instance, can be because there are a lot of scenarios that are just kind of carried over, and that you always test things like my example where we tested for every defect that ever existed. If it is a bloated, pardon?
Go ahead.
If it is a bloated test suite, the first question you want to ask, often we're talking about Selenium, and often we'll talk about, what we could do is we could do Selenium grid, and we can run multiple instances of this test. So instead of running 20 tests on one server, we'll run one test on 20 servers, and we'll compile them all like that. So that's one approach. But the other key approach is to go, actually, let's look at all the tests we're running at the UI level. Should they be unit tests? And often that's, so there's multiple, there's those three approaching. Slim down. Instead of having an elephant on a motorcycle, have an elephant pulled by a host of motorcycles. Or finally is just find a better place to put those tests.
Excellent. I think we have 2 minutes more. I would ask about your opinion on how to handle this automate everything epidemic, pandemic, or infection, whatever you can call it these days. So testers often run into this dilemma of, when management asks them to automate everything, whatever and everything, how would you suggest people to deal with this situation when they know not everything should be automated?
Well, I mean, like I said, I think one of the reasons I mentioned the example of the, you can look at it as a thing. We can only produce so many automation tests every sprint, every week, or whatever, and we kind of want to work down a list and prioritize. It's one of the reasons why that example of the spreadsheet and the voting, and everyone has a vote, and particularly give your product owner almost the deciding vote of saying, is this an important scenario? Because I'll often go, oh yeah, that's really important. And a good product owner will also go, well, that scenario isn't as important, and that helps you to say, well, we're not delivering everything, but we're making sure that we're delivering the most important things next. So that's a different conversation. That's an important conversation to have. Yeah.
Interesting. So with that, Mike, I would let you take further questions in the Slack channel dedicated to your talk. I would let you all discuss. Thank you so much for your time.
Fantastic talking to you all. Hope you've all enjoyed it with a cup of tea or coffee or whatever. And I hope to see you in Slack.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you. Cheers.